Republican Max Miller is one of nearly 80 new U.S. House lawmakers in the 118th Congress, and he represents Ohio's 7th District. While most of his family growing up identified as Democrats, he told C-SPAN about how older family members and military service influenced his conservative political philosophy, and about a grandmother who once ran for Congress.
It was my bubby, Ruth Ratner Miller, ran in 1980 in what I believe was the 22nd District at the time of Cleveland. I don't know if I share any of my current district with her previous one that she ran in. We may or we may not. I would assume that we may, a little bit of territory. But what I can tell you is this, my grandmother, she ran, and I know that she was the favorite at the time. Unfortunately, I know it didn't work out for her, but if she was still around today, I would hope that she'd be very proud of everything that we were able to accomplish. And really, this victory is for the constituency, and that's where it should be shared with. But, I do give a lot to my bubby who ran in 1980. Thank you for asking that question.
Sounds like you had a relationship with her. What impact did she have on you?
I did. Unfortunately, she passed away when I was very young, but what I can tell you about my bubby is that she's the one who kept the family together. I can tell you that she was the first person who took me on an airplane when I was a very little kid to go see my aunt and uncle out in Boston. It was the simple things that she did, and I know a lot of people don't know of her or about her, but she was very meaningful to the city of Cleveland and to the state of Ohio, and all the contributions that she made and worked tirelessly on. I mean, she tried to rehab Tower City, the Terminal Tower as we call it in Cleveland, and unfortunately we could never get it to a point where it was going to be economically sustainable for the city and for the company to have. But she did so much more than that. She was a leader for the Jewish community, and she was a leader for women as well. I mean, once again, running in 1980 as a Republican woman in the city of Cleveland in itself is a very tough challenge, but she did so graciously and throughout her entire life. So for the years that I was around to get to be around her, it was some of the greatest times of my life.
Explain your Republican roots.
Yeah.
Where does it come from?
It comes from my grandmother, believe it or not, and I come from a very Democrat family. I would say that 98% of my family, maybe even 99% are Democrats, and that's great. And I respect her values and opinions, but really when my grandmother ran for Congress, she changed her voter registration to Republican. And so did my grandfather at the time, Sam. And they're the ones who really instilled the conservative values within our family and the Miller family. And it was, passed on to my father, and my father passed it on to me. And I understand I'm a little unorthodox compared to the rest of my family, or maybe really anyone, who is Jewish in my district or demographic area. But I'm also a United States Marine, and that meant a lot to myself as well growing up and my family. So, it just means a lot.
When did you serve?
Enlisted in 2013 in the reserves, and I got out in 2019. Then I moved to the IRR.
What were your responsibilities when you were in the Marine? Where did you serve?
Yeah, I never did any combat deployments. The bulk of my time was at Kilo Company 325 in North for Sales in Pittsburgh, and I was infantry. I chose to make the decision to enlist with a college degree because I wanted the same experience as every other Marine, not to mention that every leader that I talked to, they said, if you want to be the best officer, then you should enlist first. And so that's what I did, but I found myself liking the rigorous program and the training that was brought forward to us, and that, I'm no different than anyone else, and this country gave so much to my family and to myself that I felt it was only right that I also do the same thing and enlist to support this country and to fight during a time of war.
What did you do after the military?
Yeah, after the military, I was going to get an MBA at Baldwin Wallace, and decided not to pursue that into volunteer in politics. And I started volunteering on city council races full time and really investing all of my effort and time into that. And then 2015 came around and I volunteered for then Senator Rubio. And I wasn't getting paid, and I just one day kind of looked at the senator after about 3 or 4 months, I believe it was 3, and I said, well, if I'm any good at my job, will you hire me? And he looked at me and he gave me a pat and he was like, all right, Max, welcome to the team. And that's where I kind of got my real first start within politics, was working for Senator Rubio. And to make a long story short, in February 2016, I decided that that was no longer the best place for me or the right fit. And I went to then go work for Mr. Trump. And that's how that relationship blossomed. And I was able to then go into the White House and, really proud of the work that we were able to accomplish there. But being, one of the youngest director of advances in White House history, working hand in hand, being in areas in foreign countries that you wouldn't, wish on your worst enemy, We were in North Korea for several hours negotiating with the North Korean delegation with a very small party from the United States, which is very sensitive. They also threw me in Iraq, bouncing back and forth between Erbil and al-Assad and Afghanistan as well. So all of these experiences that I've had throughout my life, and especially I would say not the last, minus the last 2 years, but really the last 4 years, have brought us to this point now to where we're in Congress. We understand what is going on here. We've done all the great things that this city has to offer in terms of dinner parties and chopping it up with, with those subset of people, but we're here to work. And that experience and that knowledge of being, talking to the president almost every day, working with cabinet secretaries and other legislators who are already here, who I have existing relationships with, I believe is going to set ourselves apart and be more ready for the challenge that's going to come ahead when we're dealing with these tough negotiations, because we've already been in the pressure cooker. We understand how we can maintain our bearing and professionalism while having civil discourse with the other side and really just negotiating that, we can find a compromise, and one does exist. And once we realize that not everyone is the enemy and we're all Americans with different ideological beliefs, then this country will be a better place, and that's hoping what we can do and bring forward here in this Congress.
You were how old when you were working for the president? And explain to people who aren't familiar with the responsibilities of being the advance person, what you had to do.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I first started working in the White House, I believe I was 27 years old. By the time I was director of advance, I believe I was 29, or I had just turned 30 at the time. 30. I was probably 30 or 31 actually. And what that job entails as the director of advance is I oversee all of the president's movements and operational movements and logistics. So I'd be working with the White House Military Office and the Secret Service 6 days out from his eventual trip, if that was domestic, where you'd oversee roughly around 250 to 500 people, depending on the threat assessment level or the event production quality. And then overseas travel as well, it would be double the amount of people you had to oversee, and then more serious negotiations with foreign delegations. So we would send a very small party ahead of time, with myself included, to go negotiate those terms with foreign delegations and with prime ministers and with presidents to make sure that when the president arrived to their country, that everything was going to flow smooth and we can have bilateral meetings set up and substantive conversation that is going to make this world a better place. So when it comes to helicopters and landing zones and figuring out an LZ and then finding a motorcade route and looking at wheels up to wheels down on Comet or Air Force One or anything like that, we oversaw every aspect like that. So there's much more in to advance than just the event production quality. You always want to make the president look presidential to the American people, and more so to the world, because we are still the greatest power that we have on this planet, and more so it's just everything else that ties into it. So thank you.
What role did you play on January 6, 2021? Were you at the White House, and were you the advance person? What role did you play that day?
Yeah. I've given my full testimony to the January 6th committee. To be clear, my deposition is fully released, and everything I've given to that committee, they've not picked up any criminal referrals because I didn't do anything wrong. Function of my job was a senior advisor to the president. I was there on that day, and in my deposition you can read that I had subsequently left that rally 15 minutes into it because I served no purpose. I really was not instrumental, and I believe that the select committee that was designed to investigate January 6th has already looked into me in every which way possible and has deemed that I have not done anything to make sure that I've done anything to be a threat to democracy. But I will say that I believe that the January 6th committee in its entirety was not a serious committee nor based off a serious investigation to find out the truth, and that I will say. I think it was more done for a primetime hour. When you hire an ABC producer, I believe that what it was, to put it on at 7 p.m. in the evening to highlight something, I believe that that's just them trying to elevate their platform. If this investigation would have been given to somebody, somebody else or a different jurisdiction or the Department of Justice, I would have taken it a lot more seriously than what they currently put a lot of people through who spent a lot of money, who currently are not in a good financial situation from the overreach of government, in my opinion.
So you had to have lawyers and pay for that?
I did. And, in my case, I was okay. But for the majority of individuals that I work with and that I deal with, they are not okay. And the harassment just isn't from people, who work for the president, who are there. You also have civilians, who are also being brought under investigations for some things. Look, if you did something wrong, you're going to be held accountable and you're going to go to prison, and you should be. But if you did nothing wrong, it doesn't mean that you should be harassed and to spend your own personal money and being harassed by the federal government and what I believe is a complete weaponization of Congress. So.
Have you heard from the former president since you won this seat and since you were sworn in, and any advice he gave you?
Yeah, I've seen him several times, and I talk to him probably about twice a week still. And his advice is always the same: is just keep your head down and keep moving, and ignore the noise. I mean, it's the same advice every time. But when I talk to him, it's not always about politics, and I think there's a big misconception. You know, when he calls me, he says, "Hey, how's your wife Emily? Right? How's your family doing? More importantly, how are you doing?" Those are the type of conversations that I usually have with him. And of course, sometimes it'll be about politics, as it always will be with the president. But that being said, you know, him and I developed a very, you know, trusting relationship with one another. He relied on me and I relied on him, and you know, I'm proud to have his endorsement. I've already supported him again for his presidential run. You know, but that being said, I believe that, you know, the constituency has seen me for who I am and my own beliefs and our own legislative priorities, separate from President Trump, but he will always have my support.